paragraph 25 of your statement on page 6 of your statement, where you dealt with the problem with Mr. Lekukela, or your conflict with Mr. Lekukela, and how you reached out to Spiwe Mashile to approach Sergeant Nkosi to try and facilitate a meeting between you.
I'm on page 6. I'm on
page
that.
6.
Yes.
Sergeant Nkosi explained, also testified about what we assume is the same meeting. And if you can go to page 665 of file 4, I think it's your bundle 3.
665.
665.
Bundle 3.
There you'll see chats.
Apologies. My bundle 3 ends at 664.
Those are documents that we gave to your legal team.
Okay, I've got a printout.
You've got hard copies, great.
Yes.
And are they paginated, 665?
Yes, true, they are, yes.
So there you'll see Sergeant Nkosi's, an extract from Sergeant Nkosi's chats with Mr. Mashile, who he saves as Comrade Didi Mabuza, Deputy President. And you'll see that he sent that Mr. Mashile sent 2 screenshots to Sergeant Nkosi at 5:36 p.m. on the 17th of January 2024. And the first screenshot is a screenshot which appears to be a screenshot of a chat between Mr. Mashile and yourself, whom he describes, whom he saves as Jerry Kazi. Does that, if you look at that screenshot on page 666, do you confirm that that is a screenshot of an exchange between yourself and Mr. Mashile?
Yes, I confirm.
And there, the message goes, okay, Kazi, from you, I've got an issue. And then there's a voice note and a voice call. And then you send an extract from your diary saying, I've got an urgent special exco now at 6. He says, you'll indicate. And you say, let's meet 007 tonight. After my meeting, it's urgent. Now, is this the meeting that you set up in relation to Sergeant Nkosi and Mpho Lekukela?
I can confirm that, SC.
And you refer to Sergeant Nkosi as 007?
In our first encounter, he was introduced to me as 007.
As 007. Did you ever ask why he was introduced as 007?
No, I was not interested. He even says me as Mpumalanga CFO. You look at Mr. Mashile says me as Jerry Kazi. I wasn't interested.
You didn't think he might have ambitions of being James Bond?
No, I was not interested at all.
Okay, we had that conversation with him. So then the exchange continues. And in fact, if we go back to page 665, you'll see that you'll see that a venue is given, the pivot please next to Palazzo, but at 667 there's another screenshot that gets sent to Sergeant Nkosi, which has essentially the same picture, except now Mr. Mashile has said to you, sorted and confirmed, and you've said, thanks, Kazi 7-ish right. Now, who was present at that meeting?
Myself, Sergeant Nkosi, Mr. Mashile, as well as Mr. Lekukela.
It was just the 4 of you?
Just the 4 of us.
You see, the one strange thing that we saw in relation to this screenshot is that shortly after he received the first screenshot asking for the meeting, Sergeant Nkosi forwarded that screenshot to Mr. Steve Motsumi. That's page 668. Have you ever met Mr. Mutsumi?
No, I've never met him and I don't know who that is.
You don't know who he is, so
No, I
you,
don't.
you can't comment on why Sergeant Nkosi would have told Mr. Mutsumi about a meeting he'd been asked to attend to broker peace between yourself and Mr. Lekokela.
No, SC, I can't confirm at all. I don't know who that is.
The very last topic you'll be glad to hear. We don't have in the papers the declaration of interest forms that you signed as a member of the BAC, to the best of my knowledge. But I think they're generic, and maybe you can correct me. If you go, for instance, to file 5, page 109, there's one for the BEC. And I think that these forms, we know that the BSC also has the same form.
Page 109.
109.
In my pack, it's the fourth pack.
Yes, your fourth bundle.
109.
In fact, it's right through, it's 104 onwards to the whole series of them. Do you see it?
I'm on page 109 SC.
Now, is this the same? I'm not, obviously it says bid evaluation committee at the top of it, but does the BAC have to sign a form in the same terms?
Yes, I agree with you.
And those forms are in content identical, even though the title at the top will be
I
different.
think they would be similar, extremely similar.
So the paragraph I'm interested in is the paragraph under the first box or table. And it says, is there anything else or the perception by others that could affect your objectivity and independence in this meeting? If your answer is yes, please supply details. Now, is that in the form that you sign at BAC?
Yes.
And it refers to the perception by others. You see? Or the
Yes.
perception by others.
Yes.
Now, and you presumably signed this form at your BAC meetings.
Yes.
And did you disclose anything under this form?
I had no interest to declare.
You had nothing to
I
disclose
had
under
nothing
that.
to declare because I had no interest with any of the bidders.
Well, let me put to you certain facts which I think are now common cause. The first is that Becky Nkosi is the owner of Ngapa share. That's accepted, is it not?
Accepted?
And Ngapa share was one of the bidders in the bid that your BAC was adjudicating in relation to TMPD 1.
Accepted?
Accepted. His brother, Sergeant Nkosi, is a close friend of yours and someone who you regard as your brother for life.
Accepted?
By the time the BAC sat, Sergeant Nkosi, your brother for life, had been approaching you, trying to get you to rig the bid in favor of Becky Nkosi's company, Ngapa share.
He didn't expressly state that, but yes.
That's what you understood
That's what I
him to be
understood
doing.
in the end, yes.
And he'd made 4 different approaches in that regard.
Yes.
While the TMPD 1 bid was pending before the Tshwane Council, you'd also been assisting Sergeant Nkosi in relation to another bid of Ngapa share that you say was for a different organ of state.
From a general perspective, I've never not once interacted with any of the returnable documents.
Yes, but you say that you were offering advice in relation, your version is you were offering advice in relation to the abstract tender document and what Ngapa share had to do to put itself in a position where it might comply.
Yes, SC.
During the period in which that TMPD 1 bid was pending before the city, you were also in direct communication with Becky Nkosi and invited him to submit a bid for a different tender to the city of Tshwane. You recall that, I think it was the refuse bags
Yes,
tender.
but to add, I did not know that he had bidded at that point.
No, but we're now looking at objective facts that were true from which others might draw an inference. Others might think your objectivity and independence was. In relation to that other tender, you had written to Sergeant Nkosi saying, quotes, "I have sent the above to Becky. We need to regroup on it." You recall that?
I recall that, and I did explain what the regrouping meant, that if needs be, if they don't understand the mandatory administrative and evaluation criteria, I'm available to help clarify from a general perspective.
You'd also been involving, while this TMPD1 bid was pending, you'd been involving Sergeant Nkosi in a range of matters relating to the affairs of the client department, the TMPD, including processes relating to the payment and termination of private service providers contracted by the city through that department.
He had involved himself, like I previously said. I did not actively involve him. I did, however, on the second instance in terms of the termination, send him that communication, which I have agreed that it's a perception that I involved him in that instance, but I further did try to clarify that as well when I requested the direct contact details of the user department.
Well, whoever started that process, you continued with it, and you continued to communicate in relation to those Gubis matters with Chief Dlamini through Sergeant Nkosi.
I accept that for the Gubis payment, SC.
In the process of involving Sergeant Nkosi in Gubis-related matters, you put Sergeant Nkosi in a position where he gained access to documents exchanged between the city and one of the competing bidders in TMPD1, namely Gubis, including an invoice that showed the pricing used by Gubis in its dealings with the city.
I disagree with that respectfully, SC. I did not share an invoice with Sergeant Nkosi.
You didn't share an invoice with Sergeant Nkosi, but if you hadn't involved Sergeant Nkosi in the Gubis process, he would never have received that invoice.
I also respectfully disagree with that notion. The general or whoever sent him that invoice took a decision on their own, and they will explain for themselves. I cannot account for that.
But the general only got involved with Sergeant Nkosi in relation to Gubis because Sergeant Nkosi had set himself up as your intermediary with the general in relation to Gubis.
I agree to that. However, at no point did I authorize any sharing of confidential information in terms of the Gubis payment, and at no point did I personally share any confidential and sensitive information on the Gubis payment.
So we've looked at 8 different facts. Did it not occur to you that if competing bidders in TMPD1 were aware of these 8 facts, they would have thought that you were not a person who could objectively preside over the adjudication of TMPD1?
At that particular point in time, I'm going to cover this question. At this point in time, Chair, I did not perceive that as an interest, purely based on the fact that, firstly, my bias or my objectivity was not impaired. I did not know Begi. He is not an associate of mine. I agree, the brother is an associate of mine, but Begi is not an associate of mine whatsoever. I only have engagement with Sergeant Nkosi. So I knew from that perspective that, firstly, my bias was not going to be, my objectivity, apologies, was not going to be impaired whatsoever. Second to that, the BAC is a panel-based decision-making body. It's not one individual. There are a number of subject matter experts who sit throughout that process, meaning objectivity is further enhanced. Chairperson, I also want to confirm on the TMPD1 matter, which we are raising. There are score sheets that were provided to me as part of the bundle. Within this bundle, I think it's the 4th bundle, independent members scored all bidders accordingly, which gives an indication that these bidders were compliant by the 11th of April. That's when the score sheets were signed, and that's an essential date for us to consider. Lastly, Chair, on the basis of my objectivity not being impaired, because I don't know Begi, I'm not Begi's friend. Yes, I'm his brother's friend, I can concur, and I have admitted that. At that point in time, I saw that my objectivity would not be impaired whatsoever, and I signed the declaration. Further to that, the panel-based decision-making process, where there are a number of subject matter experts within BAC, including legal services, also assured us that my objectivity wouldn't have been affected. However, Chair, in hindsight, when we are discussing all of these matters, I need to agree that now when we're discussing these matters, there is a perception of conflict, that it's clear and it's apparent and I can't avoid it. However, what I'm certain on is that when I signed this declaration form, from my perspective, my objectivity was not impaired whatsoever. It remains not impaired at this point in time. It was a panel-based decision-making process with a number of subject matter experts who would have equally made their views and objectives to this matter.
Let's deal with two separate issues. The issue in relation to the BAC being a panel. That can't affect issues relating to the declaration of interest, because the purpose of the declaration of interest relates to the bias or appearance of bias of any individual member of the panel. You'll accept that? I
accept that. However, the decisions that are taken are not solely mine. In the event, for argument's sake, which I don't agree to, and it was not the case, my bias, I was not objective, and it was impaired. Based on this panel-based decision-making process, it would have been a further safeguard. However, what's essential from my perspective is that initially, from the onset, and now as we speak, my objectivity is not was not and is not impaired. However, I'm seeing the perception that is being created around this when you are raising the sequence of events of what occurred, and we've discussed the merits of those issues in a separate discussion.
The purpose of these declaration of interest forms relates to individual cases, doesn't relate to the committee. Each individual needs to sign them. So the fact that the committee acts as a safeguard is irrelevant to these individual interest forms.
I see, at the time, when we're evaluating or adjudicating over this process, my bias, my objectivity was not impaired, and I still agree to that. I'm just adding a further factor to give you comfort that in the event it was, which it wasn't at all, and I confirmed that there's a panel-based decision-making. And in light of that, it is a further safeguarding process that I on my own would never be able to take a decision of this nature on my own. I also further agree that in hindsight, through the revelations that are coming out of this commission, there could be there might be perceived conflict of interest. But from my perspective, at the point of signing this, I was not conflicted at all, and my objectivity would not have been impaired.
Mr. Mnisi, on your logic, the logic that the BAC is a committee and a decision that comes out of that is a committee decision, and therefore an individual couldn't impact the outcome. On that logic, then there's no point to this safeguard that people who have an interest or potentially have an interest should declare it, and in fact go so far as not sit through that process, because on your logic, it's a committee decision, so it shouldn't matter. And so you could change the facts here and say, even if Begi were your brother, or he was your friend, your direct friend, that would not disqualify you or require you to make a declaration, because the BAC is a committee decision. So even your bias would not matter, because others would overrule you by votes. That cannot be. That's not correct. And I think, maybe I may say, I expect that as CFO and custodian of your procurement processes, you are not proposing that the way you are reasoning it is correct. It can't be correct.
Commissioner, Begi is not my friend.
No, that's why I say you could change the facts for purpose of my discussion with you, following your logic. Remember, your logic is BAC is a committee, so no one individual can sway the decision or can determine, in fact, the outcome of a BAC, because it's a committee which comprises other people. Effectively, meaning it really shouldn't matter that you may or may not have had an interest and not declare it because it's a committee. That's the effect of what you're saying. And I'm saying, but it cannot be correct that is so, because then if you are correct, then there's no point to these declarations, to these committees, because it's a committee of people, and the decision is not a decision of a single person.
Commissioner, I feel there is a point, because in terms of these declarations, you need to declare if your family members, your close friends, are directors within these companies. So it's still a relevant matter that must be considered. Fact of this matter is that Begi is not my friend. Sergeant Kosi is not a director of Ngapeshea. On the signing of this declaration, my objectivity was not impaired. I still maintain that till now. However, in hindsight, I'm agreeing that with the sequence of events, there is a perception of conflict. But at the point of signing, I had no conflict whatsoever. I still have no conflict whatsoever, but the perception, it looks like there is something that's there.
Okay, I've heard you, thank you.
Are you aware of what the administrative law in relation to perceptions of conflict is? Do you know that if there is an objective perception of conflict, that the administrative decision can be reviewed and set aside?
I'm not aware of that.
So in administrative review cases, you don't need to show actual bias or actual conflict. You only have to show a reasonable appearance of conflict or a reasonable appearance of bias. That is the law.
I don't know the law. So I think I'll have to engage that with my legal team, but I can't comment on that. But what I do know is that there have been cases that we've seen out, particularly in reference to perception of compliance and how those were ruled against. There's many cases that we could refer here to. I think the first one that comes to the top of my mind is the previous Chief Justice Mogoeng, and I think his wife saving the state attorney presenting a matter to him. That was a matter that was deliberated on. There's another matter that I'm aware of which involves yourself, Senior Counsel Chaskelson, where your dad at one point in time was a president, you had been an advocate in a specific matter, and panel-based decision-making process was also considered. So I'm aware of the general matters around that in terms of the perception of conflict, but like I'm saying, I will address the matter further with my legal team for any further clarity.
Look, in relation to my personal position, the issue of panel was utterly irrelevant. And there's certainly no suggestion in any of these matters, including the decided judgment that because it's a panel issue, it is different. It has nothing to do with being a panel court. But what I want to put to you is, well, let's just establish, you accept now that those facts that are common cause give rise to a reasonable apprehension that you may not have been objective. You say you were objective, didn't impair your objectivity, but a third-party competing bidder would have had a reasonable apprehension that you could not objectively assess this, be part of the adjudication of this tender.
No, I don't agree with you. And I have stated the reasons why I don't agree with you. I'm only saying that in hindsight, there is a perception of conflict, which must further be assessed on its own merit. I do not agree with you. I was objective in terms of handling this matter. I have no interest in the company Ngapeshea whatsoever. And my reason behind that, I signed this declaration with my knowledge of objectivity not being impaired. So I don't agree with you on that perspective.
Let's put it this way. A reasonable competing bidder could have had a perception that you were conflicted, could have had a perception that you were conflicted. I'm not saying that you were conflicted for now. I'm putting to you that a reasonable competing bidder, now in possession of all of these facts, could have had a perception that you were conflicted.
I don't agree with you, Essie. These facts have its own merits, and we've discussed that in general. If we present these as facts, it's as if we are not taking into consideration the critical discussion that we had around those. Hence, I'm saying I agree to the fact of there being a perception in general. I'm not saying any bidder would have seen this and said, yes, there was a perception, but in general, there seemed to have been a perception. But I maintain that during me signing this declaration, my objectivity was not impaired. Further to that, the panel-based decision-making process was an essential step of concurring the process.
So what is this? So there would have been a perception, or there could have been a perception that you were conflicted. You accept that?
In hindsight, I accept it.
In hindsight, you accept it,
Yes.
based on the objective facts, not that you were conflicted, but the facts that we've been through might have created a perception that you were conflicted.
I've agreed to that,
And
taking into account the explanations that we had on each items. It's important for me to raise that so the record is clear.
And just looking at those facts, would it have been reasonable to have had that perception, just looking at those facts?
I don't know. I can't comment on that. Hence, I'm saying this matter must be adjudicated on separately. I can't comment on that fact. I'm just saying from my reviewing of this, a perception seems to have been created in hindsight.
You see, Mr. Mnisi, what I want to put to you is that, quite aside from the true facts of whether or not you were biased and you were involved in Sergeant Nkosi's attempts to rig this tender, your conduct in continuing to sit on the BAC as a matter of law renders this bid capable of being reviewed and set aside by any losing bidder. And what you have done is you've put the city in a situation where this bid is capable of being set aside by any losing bidder because of your inability to see that the objective facts relating to your relationship to Ngapa Share disqualified you from sitting on this bid.
Yes, I completely disagree with you. A thorough supply chain management process was followed in terms of the evaluation and the appointment of this bid. Further to that, the external legal firm played a significant oversight in terms of validating the contents and the facts around the award. In terms of the declaration, I was clear. I've got no interest in Ngapa Share. I still have no interest in Ngapa Share. I'm not an associate of the director whatsoever. I am an associate of the brother, but that does not make me an associate of the director of Ngapa Share. I also confirmed that on signing this declaration, my objectivity was not affected at all, and it's also key to add that the panel-based decision-making process is essential in order to add additional weight to that. So I respectfully disagree with you on that notion.
Did you disclose any of the facts that we've gone through to the independent legal firm?
Which facts?
Becky's brother, Sergeant Nkosi, is a close friend and someone who you regard as a brother for life. Sergeant Nkosi had been approaching you, trying to get you to rig the bid in favor of his brother's company. While the present bid was pending before the Tshwane Council, you'd also been assisting Sergeant Nkosi in relation to a bid that Ngapa Share had submitted to another organ of state. During the period in which the present bid was pending before the city, you were in direct communication with Becky Nkosi, the director of Ngapa Share, inviting him to submit bids for a different tender. In relation to that other different tender of the city, you'd written to Sergeant Nkosi saying, "Have sent the above to Becky. We need to regroup on it." You'd also been involving Sergeant Nkosi in a range of matters relating to the affairs of the client department, the TMPD, including processes relating to the payment and termination of private service providers contracting with the department. And in the process, you'd given Sergeant Nkosi access to documents between the city and one of the competing bidders in TMPD1, including an invoice that showed the pricing used by that bidder in respect of the city. Did you disclose any one of those 8 facts to the law firm?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sorry, well, the question is, did you disclose any one of those facts to the law firm whose rubber stamp you now want to rely on?
These are not facts, SC, and I can't agree to that as being facts. Because I did not share, firstly, I did not share any sensitive information with Sergeant Nkosi in terms of invoicing. You raised it as the last fact now.
I thought we'd agreed that these were facts, but let's take them one by one so we can actually address them one by one. Becky's brother, Sergeant Nkosi, is a close friend and someone who you regard as your brother for life. Is that a fact?
That's a fact.
Did you disclose it to the law firm?
There was no need to disclose that to the law
Yes
firm.
or no? You can give explanations and theories as to whether there was a need or not. Did you disclose it?
First answer to that is no.
Okay. Well,
Can I
you can give
explain?
your explanations
SC
later. Let's just clarify the position
SC,
in relation
apologies.
to the facts first. You can
Professor,
come back, take
apologies,
each
SC.
one and give your explanation. I just want to establish the facts because you weren't willing to say, when I asked you, did you disclose any of these facts to the lawyer?
My profuse apologies, SC. We're going to get lost in discussion if you're unable to allow me to please expand.
No,
on each
I want to establish the facts in answer to my question. I just want an answer to the question. Don't want your explanation yet. You can give the explanation later. Let's get the ground facts ready.
SC, that's
So-
that I respectfully request.
Mr. Mnisi, you've just said what Mr. Shaskalson put to you were not facts. Can we just establish the facts? You can, if you then want to explain, and you can take notes on all of them. But let's just establish the facts, please. If at the end of it you want to say, although I say A, B, C, D are facts, here's an explanation I want to give. Let's just get a move on what is fact and what is not, please.
The next fact, Sergeant Nkosi had made approaches to you which you understood as approaches that were trying to get you to rig the bid in favor of his brother's company. Is that a fact?
That's what I understood.
So it is a fact that you understood that Sergeant Nkosi had been approaching you in an attempt to persuade you to rig the bid in favor of his brother's company.
Okay?
It's a fact. Did you disclose it to the attorneys? Simple yes or no?
Right now, no.
No.
There was no need, but I'll explain later.
You
Sorry,
can talk about need later. He had made 4 different approaches to you in this regard. Is that a fact?
Yes.
Did you disclose it to the attorneys?
No.
While the present bid was pending before the Tshwane Council, you'd also been assisting Sergeant Nkosi in relation to a bid that Ngapa Share had submitted to another organ of state. Is that a fact?
Yes.
Did you disclose it to the
No.
attorneys? During the period in which the present bid was pending before the Tshwane Council, you were in direct communication with Becky Nkosi, the director of Ngapa Share, inviting him to submit a bid for a different tender from the Tshwane Council. Is that a fact? Is it a
Yes,
fact?
yes.
Did you disclose
No.
it to the attorneys? No. In relation to that tender, you had written to Sergeant Nkosi saying, have sent the above to Becky, we need to regroup on it. Is that a
Yes.
fact?
You spoke at the same time.
Yes, Commissioner,
thank
apologies.
you.
Yes.
And you didn't disclose this to any
Nope.
attorneys?
No, no, SC.
You had involved Sergeant Nkosi in a range of matters relating to the affairs of the client department, the TMPD, and these processes included processes relating to the payment and termination of private service providers contracted by the TMPD. Is that a fact?
It's not a fact.
What is factually incorrect in
What's
relation to
factually,
it?
sorry, SC, what's factually incorrect is about payment. I involved him in terms of the purchase orders. No involvement whatsoever on payment aspect.
Okay, so if I were to say, including processes relating to purchase orders and the termination of private, you would be happy with
Yes.
that? And you didn't disclose that to any attorneys?
Nope.
And in those processes, through involving Sergeant Nkosi, you put him in a position where he got access to documents between the city and one of the competing bidders, including an invoice that shows the pricing used by that competing bidder in relation to the city. Is that a...
It's not a fact. I did not give him any information, nor did I put him in a position to receive that.
So you are suggesting that if you had not consented to Sergeant Nkosi intermediating your relationship with Deputy Chief Dlamini, he would still have got the invoice that Gubis issued to the city?
What I'm suggesting is that I did not give him authority at any stage in time to obtain any sensitive information. I'm sure Deputy Chief Dlamini will have to answer it on himself. From my perspective, this is not a fact.
If you had said to Sergeant Nkosi at the outset, Sergeant Nkosi, you have no business getting involved in any TMPD matters. I will speak to General Dlamini myself. Please do not approach him. Would he have got access to that invoice which discloses Gubis's pricing to the city?
Chair, I can't comment on what would have happened. The matter that you're putting towards me is that, is this a fact that I enabled him or I gave him information, sensitive information of bidders? And that's not a fact.
I see.
I'm not going to speculate on what would have happened.
You were aware that Sergeant Nkosi had got access to that document?
Afterwards, I was aware and there's nothing I could do to stop that. He already had that.
Yes, but at the time that you sat in the committee, you knew that Sergeant Nkosi, the brother of the Ngapasheya director, had got access through the city to the pricing of a competitor in relation to the city.
9 months down the line, I was aware of that.
You were aware of that, yes. Now, you disclosed none of this to any attorney who was expressing a view on the probity of the process. That's common cause.
I've said yes to those issues, except for the last issue that you're saying.
Well, you didn't disclose that to any attorney. Did you say to someone, I didn't facilitate it, but Sergeant Nkosi actually got access to a Gubis invoice to the city?
Okay. No, I did not disclose that. I didn't see the need.
I see, yeah. Now, if you want to explain any of that, please feel free.
Okay. I can explain now. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
my
SC.
guest.
The first one is, did I disclose a relationship with Sergeant Nkosi is my friend? Sergeant Nkosi is neither a director of Ngapasheya, nor is he a shareholder of the entity. As per the declaration form that's in front of us, it's clear on what you should disclose against. Any friends that I have that have no interest or any association with the firm, there's no need to disclose that. I saw that irrelevant, and there was no need for me to disclose that to the probity teams. Secondly, further to that, the exercise that was undertaken, there was no request for me to disclose that. I had disclosed information of the directors as per the declaration of form interest that the city has. The second matter, you say, Sergeant Nkosi made approaches to me, and I did clarify on the approaches that were there. Firstly, I had insufficient evidence to disclose this to any party because it was clear that he was asking me for compliance. I did suspect, I can agree, that at one point, due to the persistence, it's now resulting to an individual persisting that I go further than that. I had no conclusive evidence. There was nothing for me to declare to any of the property teams. Item number 3, you raised the same issue but on 4 different occasions. Equally, I had no conclusive evidence. There was nothing for me to declare. This was an individual constantly saying, may you please assist with compliance. Hence, there was nothing for me to declare to the probity team. The fourth one is on an assistance on another bidder. I have explained this matter. Assistance that I provide was on a general perspective. Did not interact with any of the returnable documents of the company at hand. Hence, further to that, I expected no financial gain. I had no interest in that. It was just me providing guidance to a friend in general terms to a bid that was open at the time. I did not see the need to disclose that because it doesn't affect any objectivity that might be there on a bid that is currently in question. You refer to direct communications on another bid. That bid was open, and in reference to discussion they had had with Sergeant Nkosi, the regrouping clearly meant, if needs be, I'll explain to you the contents of administrative requirements, the mandatory requirements, as well as the evaluation criteria. There's nothing wrong with that. I have given evidence on why that's allowed if individuals do ask you to clarify for that. That ultimately didn't happen. Secondly, they weren't even awarded. I still maintain that I have no interest as a result of that factor, which brings me to conclude that there was nothing necessary for me to declare. The third one is on the Gubis payment. On the Gubis payment, I was clear. Sergeant Nkosi involved himself. I didn't actively say, may you please assist me with mediating this. A phone call was given to me and had a discussion. Hence, from that perspective, I did not actively encourage him to assist me in terms of dealing with that matter at hand. I did, however, admit, Chair, that in hindsight, on this matter, I should have requested for a number. And on this, I should have requested for a number so that I'm able to deal directly with the Deputy Chief Dlamini. On the second aspect you have raised on the Gubis payment on termination, this was clear. I asked for his number afterwards, and I subsequently took the matter up with the General directly. There was no further interaction with Sergeant Nkosi in reference to the termination letter. In hindsight, I'd also agreed that this is an issue that could have resulted in a problem for me, and I should have got the details directly, and I subsequently received those. Hence, from my perspective, there's nothing to declare. I still have no interest, and my objectivity would not have been impaired whatsoever. The last one that you had raised, in terms of giving him access to information, I disagreed with this. It's not a fact. There's no single instance from my perspective where I shared any sensitive documentation with him. The termination letter, like I said, was general. We've seen that. There's nothing sensitive about that. The service provider had already received it. And from my perspective, he would have got no advantage, firstly. Nor would his brother's company would have gotten advantage, purely taking into account that they're not even a bidder who would be eligible to be allocated any ad hoc related services work. Thanks, SC.
So, Mr. Mnisi, if this whole process is repeated next year in another bid, and all of these facts were to happen again, would you still sit on the BAC and not make any disclosure on your interest form?
In hindsight, I did agree that there is a perception of conflict having existed. Firstly, during this exercise, I've learned a lot and I've identified my mistakes and errors. I can assure you, errors of this nature will never reoccur in the near future. However, if they do reoccur, a perception is there, and I would not sit in that committee. Like I said, this is a perception issue that would still have been evaluated, because I'm saying, as I speak at that point in time, I've got no interest and my objectivity wouldn't have been impaired. I still maintain that. However, I've seen a lot of shortcomings and shortfalls and gaps within the conduct, and I would put systems in place to improve that moving forward.
Well, my question was first, would you sit on the BAC again? Yes or no?
Okay.
If all of these facts are repeated and you now are called to a BAC meeting against that background, would you sit on the BAC?
The first
Yes or no? Yes or no? Just simple yes or no.
Okay, no.
No. Okay.
Me
Thank
expanding further on that, SC, is that this would never happen again. So if we speculate what would happen in the future, it's a bit difficult for me to concur with. I can explain what happened, but in the future,
I'm
this would never
satisfied with your
occur
answer.
again.
No, you wouldn't. I appreciate that. Mr. Mnisi, you'll be relieved, as I am, to hear that I have no further questions.
Thank you, SC.
Mr. Mnisi,
Chair.
when Mr. Chaskalson engaged you on the